With that, we'll move on to unfinished business. The first item is to discuss and possibly approve the curriculum proposals and budget reduction and additions for the 2014-15 school year. This is what we've had in front of us for some time and have discussed it over the course of a few meetings and tried to tweak it a little bit and make some changes to make it as fair as we think possible. And so I don't know, Greg or Cindy, if there's anything more that you want to add to that. We have the modified proposals.
You know, the one thing I would add, and
Yeah.
I think it's something we need to keep in front of us as we're looking down the road for the next 3 years. As we've said with everything financially, these are estimates. So these plans, these things that we have sitting out there, I guess are not the be or end alls, depending on what those estimates actually end up happening. So, you know, when I'm saying, you know, we're making reductions for X amount of dollars in 1 year, that may be more or less depending on the circumstances of the year. So we need to know that although you're going to make these decisions for the 14-15 school year, depending on the referendum, what happens there, if that referendum doesn't pass, there will be other decisions to make, and depending on what the final dollars are, that will have an impact. So I just want to make sure that we understand that the public, that this is really fluid and will change every year to a certain degree, and some of that's going to be based, I think, on, I believe, Jan, you were saying that, you know, not stopping, continuing to move forward, I think was the gist that you talked about at one of your workshops here, not just focusing on the problems, but what's ahead of us and in the future. So I think we need to keep our eyes on that, and this being a little bit fluid, and not, you know, give the impression that this is it and that's all it is, because it'll move as we go forward too.
The only other document that I have that is new that was embedded was information on the TAG position, the Gifted and Talented Coordinator position, because one of the things that we want to stress is that although the recommendation is to eliminate the TAG coordinator position, it's not eliminating the program. And so I did ask Mr. Shutter to send me a list of everything that he feels is critical that he does during the course of the school year. And we met with the administrative team, primarily at the elementary level, to look at how do we shift those responsibilities and how do we ensure that those things will be, those programs will continue to be in place and working. And so you can go through that list and see that we believe we can manage the changes. And I also embedded for you an email. I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to read it, from a parent who was concerned about the elimination of the TAG position as well. And I did respond to the parent and just talked a little bit about, there have been, again, and I've talked about this before, but there have been significant changes in how we view gifted and talented education and how we provide programming for kids. And, you know, I can remember a time in this district when early graduation was not allowed. You could be really smart and want to get out to get to college, and you couldn't. There was a policy that early graduation was not allowed. And so there have been a lot of changes that have taken place that have allowed for much more smooth transition from grade to grade, the use of acceleration. I can remember meetings when I was the TAG coordinator trying to convince a principal, let this kid get to the next grade level and try this class, and if they're not successful, we can always go back, but give them the opportunity. Those types of conflicts don't exist today. I mean, our administrative team understands the importance of, if we have a talented student, let's get them challenged. And what's it going to take to do that? So I think there's a far better understanding from administration. I think our educators are coming out of college with a far better understanding of how to differentiate to meet the needs of every student in the classroom. And I guess I believe that we're capable of doing the job without the position. Now again, if, I informed the parent who sent the email that I would encourage her to be communicating with her child regularly next year and finding out, does he feel like he's being challenged or not, and then communicating that with the building principal and myself. Because if we are falling short, then we've got to figure out how we fill in those gaps, or we come back and say this hasn't worked to the degree that we thought it should. But again, I think our staff and our administrative team is capable of accepting the responsibilities that go with providing for the education of all of our kids, including our most gifted. And I came across an article just tonight as I was eating supper. It's our gifted kids, our gifted students slighted in schools. And the article takes a stance that yes, they are. I mean, all you have to do is look at the number of employees that are hired for special ed students compared to the number of employees that you have for gifted and talented. And there are only 26 states, I think, that they said that require gifted and talented program, and Wisconsin is one. We have a standard T, which requires programming for gifted and talented students. But when they talked about inexpensive options for kids, these are all things that we're doing. It talks about, ability grouping, putting kids together and allowing them to move at a faster pace. It talks about dual enrollment, allowing kids to take classes at the secondary level or at the high school if they're at the middle school, or at college if they're at the high school. So it was just interesting that I didn't get any new ideas here. These are all things that we understand we need to do and we are making available for kids in our school district. In response to Mr. Burkwald, who is here, I certainly sympathize with his concerns that we're making a lot of changes in the Compass program as we move those students back to Tola Middle School. He mentioned that Mrs. Weigel will be in the building, so I think that can provide a source of comfort to the kids knowing that she is there, and they will see her as they travel throughout the day, even though she won't be responsible for their education. We believe that with the counselors that we have available at the middle school, there'll be additional help for those students. The fact that if they really excel in art or music, that they're going to have the opportunity to move into those courses. It's just very hard to justify 2 teachers for 9 students. And I agree with Mr. Burkwald. We want those kids to be successful. There's no question about that. But we also have to cut the strings sometimes and work through problems to help kids grow. And there may be some struggles. But again, I would say if the bottom completely falls out, then we're going to be coming back to you and saying, you know what, we do need some additional help here.
And just to be clear, then, so the Compass will be transferred to the middle school. They will have their own dedicated space?
Yes, they do. Mr. Buss has made arrangements for that. They have a classroom.
And then they'll still have the same sort of daily structure, curriculum that they have now?
No, it will. The proposal is that it will be different. Currently, the structure right now of the Compass program is between 2 teachers that are receiving all their education in one classroom or between 2 classrooms. What will be the middle school crossroads program next time is modeling after what the high school has in many instances. And it's the opportunity through distance learning, currently through NovaNet, where students will receive individual pacing. It's that personalized learning at their own ability level in the majority of their core classes. By bringing it to the middle school, what it does offer is all the related arts opportunities in a much more intense, just like their
regular education middle school peers, they'll be receiving the same opportunities there. So as Mr. Burkwald had brought up earlier, great opportunity to start to go ahead and infuse the students to make that next step to be actually in the regular classrooms with the rest of their students and feel a part of Toma Middle School, that they're not an entity by themselves. They truly are a part of the middle school experience of all middle school students.
It's a half in, half out.
Yes.
But it will be individualized. So
Yes.
if we find that 2 of those 9 students really is struggling being half out, then we'll keep them with Mr. Johnson. And they can be learning through the use of Novanet or some other types of online options that exist.
On the
One of
other side, it gives you also the opportunity for students that are doing exceptionally well. They can be in the regular classes with their peers for core content area, not being pulled out. So it really gives the opportunity, students more opportunities based on their own learning ability.
So, I mean, right now, here, it was all in, no out.
Correct.
Now they're going to half in, half out.
Correct.
If we're using that terminology. And what will be what again, I'm just trying to clear up, what's the in and what's the out? Where are they with the other?
Sure.
Where are they with their regular ed?
As far as for the in, all the students right now, we're looking at all the students in with the Crossroads program with Mr. Johnson for their core classes, their math, science, social studies, things of that nature. It's their related arts and their exploratory classes that they have out. That automatically those students will automatically have a chance to go ahead and be out at their grade level, working with their grade level peers in the regular education setting for their related arts.
And it will all start that way?
Yes,
Okay.
they'll all start that way.
And then it could be
correct.
tweaked.
That can be very fluid as we move along, depending upon how successful the students are in any, both the in or the out, we're using that term.
Yes.
Based on their level of success and making that transition ideally to get them into the regular classrooms as much as possible if that's where they're at.
Okay.
One of the things that I haven't chatted with you about, Mr. Buss, but Dr. Skrivanik and I have talked about it, is the name of the program here is Compass. And I think it is going to be important for us to keep that name as we transition to the middle school. We've said it's going to be kind of a mini light or a light Crossroads program, but I think to maintain the integrity of the program, we're going to continue to call it the Compass program for middle school kids, because it's all about their direction, turning their direction around and getting on the right course. So that's one of the changes. And then in talking with Phil and Angie, they're a little bit skeptical about Novanet. We are going to have ports available for them so that individualized learning can take place. But Phil feels pretty confident that he can be instructing kids with the use of tools that they've used here. They use Khan Academy, they use the STAR assessments, and then you've got STAR at the middle school too, but there's a number of tools that they use here that they'll still have access to at Toma Middle School. But I think the key is that it's very fluid. So every child, you may find a child can be out they're a high-level reader, they want to be in reading class reading those novels with their classmates. They love art and music and Fayed, so they're out for those things. But they tend to get stressed when it's dealing with math or science. Another child may have to, have special Fayed provisions that are made for that child because they're not going to adapt to being out in Fayed class with other kids. So they're going to look at each child individually and hopefully design a program that will work for that child to be successful.
Mr. Johnson and Ms. White are already looking at specific students that the baseline we're looking at is all students in for the core content classes, all students out for the related arts classes, and then looking at each specific child, making that movement from building to building. If that's the case, if there are students that they feel already would be strong and successful, let's say science, just to pick a topic, that they'd be very strong and successful in the regular education room for science, that's where they go for their science class with their actual science teachers in there. So it gives them the opportunity, and if, I guess Mrs. already said, if we find things that are working well, we can make that change. If not, we can pull those students back. Having them in the same building gives a lot more opportunities than the separate building.
And the 9 students are all the middle school age group.
Correct.
So
Those
they're
students will all be
6th,
7th, 8th grade students next year.
And he's able to individualize to that grade level
Yes.
for each one. As they would here.
And Again, NovaNet is similar to Khan Academy, or, I mean, it's in place of using regular textbooks. I'm not quite sure how
I'll let you explain a little more for
used.
NovaNet.
Sorry about that. I'll tell you about the name change. It was on our agenda. NovaNet is a federal and a state kind of a leveled curriculum it's delivered through the computer. It's not a virtual school. You have to be plugged in to the school because we also feel that students need to have a teacher there. So it is similar and correlates with like our reading, our social studies, our science at middle school through high school. Okay, it is something we've used for longer than I've been here over at our high school Crossroads program, which is something we're kind of taking our high school program and our Compass program and turning it into this blend because we want to bring in the best of both worlds, that safety net and ability to instruct in that core areas, but yet at the same time use those engaging lessons that Compass can do. And I think everyone's kind of explained that. And the same token, though, as you saw from Steve, is that ownership within the middle school and all the supports the middle school offers. I mean, you know, there are so many staff over there that can help deal with those students and their needs that we just don't have here. Okay, I mean, there's no gym here. There's a gym there. There's no related arts classes per se. We kind of do those own. I'm not criticizing the Compass that's here right now, but we've made it work based on the resources we had, and I think this is a great opportunity for the kids because when we take a look at some of the reasoning of some of these changes, I'm going to go back to what Ms. Zardi said. Some of this is not due to enrollment. I mean, there's an enrollment issue here. 9 students, 2 teachers, as she has said, but also about our philosophy. And we're taking a look at some things that we've done historically. I mean, the Robert Cooper Learning Center has been in existence for a very long time. I don't even have the exact date. But again, we take a look at some of our middle school students and how they've transitioned, and I don't really like that word, but it's a good word, how they've transitioned at the high school. I'll let Mr. Hay maybe give you an example of some of the issues that they face. Those kids do struggle, okay? And remember, in the end, we're helping the schools work with those kids, and we still have that final safety net to get them to graduation and onto their dreams, which is still going to be here, the MSA and Excel program. Sorry, long answer.
No, I appreciate it. And even Mr. Burkwald thought that the actual relocation of middle school was a great idea.
Yeah, and I was vague with some of his questions because of HIPAA and FERPA laws, so I can't get into details with one student, so I don't think I was being flippant. I just being vague, trying to dodge it.
Yep, understood.
And those 9 students have had both teachers, Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Weigel, right? So it's
Correct.
not like they're going to the middle school and having a completely new teacher working with them.
All the students, I mean, the 6th graders have had Mr. Johnson for 1 year, but the 7th graders have had him for 2 years. When he talked about it, and rightly so, it's kind of like they're a team. At times he mentions, boy, you act like an old married couple. You two tag team these kids so well. But that's what works here. That same concept will be in place because there'll be other staff to help support those kids. It's not just going to be Mr. Johnson by himself. And that's Mr. Johnson and the entire middle school. Well, that's very different.
Okay, thanks for all that information. That's very helpful for me, at least. Other questions about any of the...
I got a few questions regarding the splitting up the responsibilities of the day coordinator. On this whole list, I understand that this is basically everything that Rocky Shutter does, which is great, but most of the stuff on this list, I guess, isn't really what I would call tag, the Heritage Fair. I mean, it's all the students are allowed to participate and stuff. But I do have some specific questions about how, mostly at the elementary level, how things are getting split up and who's making the decisions as to whether or not things are, what's going to be done. The testing the students using the Sage Slosh and says school psychologists will do that if needed. Well, who determines if it's needed or not? Is that the building principal or?
Well, there are systems in place at our elementary schools. There's response to intervention meetings, and there's also what they call IRT meetings, which are IRTs. Does anybody remember what IRT stands for? Intervention, response. But there's different meetings where they will be discussing kids. So in those meetings, if it's determined that There may be additional testing that's needed for a gifted kid. That's where that would be a group or collaborative process between the teacher, the administrator, counselor, people that know the child best.
And how is that done now, I guess? I mean, I know Rocky's involved with that, but is it more the same as a collaborative thing?
I'm cold, so I can't hear a word you're saying, so I have to come up. Sorry. What was the question?
We were just talking about what an ERT meeting was. I thought I wrote it down. Oh, yeah, it's intervention response team.
Teams.
So,
Was your question on testing or?
Well, I got several other questions, but this is just one example.
Okay,
The
fire them
Sage Slauson testing, it says the school psychologist will do that if needed, but who determines if it's needed? Cindy had said it's going to be this ERT team or whatever, but how is that different than what's done now?
There is a lot of data on students that we have as a district. So to say that a one test, like a Slosson's, which I would question even the validity of that, but I'm not going to get into to that test, is, one test is not going to make or break a child. I mean, so, you're going to have a whole stream of data when you look at, you're going to have the state testing, we're going to have our benchmark scores, we're going to have the teachers, formative and informative assessment. You have all that information. So when it comes right down to making decisions about our tag students, it's going to be made in the same way when we do it on the other end of the diamond, which is our special needs students. You're going to gather all this data and make the decision what's in the best interest for the child. So we're not going to just use one test that's going to say you pass this test or other. And I don't know if that was what you were asking.
No, that's not what I was asking.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out the parameters of who's making the decisions for these kids.
The principals are going to be leading those teams.
Okay.
I think the Slauson, for instance, is an IQ test.
Yes, it is.
Do we need to give an IQ test? I think a number of years ago we moved to more of a needs-based assessment with gifted and talented. So if a teacher says this kid needs more because they're showing us all of these things that they're interested in and that they can do, we don't care how they score on a Slauson. I don't know how many times Rocky is currently giving those assessments, because again, we have so much other data that does exist. And if we have a teacher saying this child needs more, or if we have a parent saying my kid is saying they're bored, that they're not enjoying school, that needs assessment plays probably a bigger role than an IQ type of test.
Well, and that was just one example. I mean,
Yeah.
the other question I have on is the writing of the DEPs. Who determines if there's a DEP that's needed? I mean, I know right now, like Rocky's heavily involved in that, but I mean, is that going to be up to the building principals as well?
Yes.
And they have been involved in writing.
They have been, but usually it comes at Rocky's recommendation, right? So who's going to recommend if a student needs a DEP now? I mean, the building principals aren't going to know that without somebody's input.
Well, again, I'd go back to the ERT teams, those those teams that are meeting, because they're going to be talking about gifted kids.
I can speak a little bit to it, just because at the high school, we really haven't had a tag person. So at our level, I think, and this is what you probably see happen at the other levels, but the recommendations that we get are from parents, from teachers, and from the counselor. The counselor plays a pretty integral role in helping manage the DEP process for us. And while it's not often that at the high school level we're recognizing someone for the first time, it does happen. And I can think of, 3 or 4 off the top of my head DEPs that we have done initial DEPs at the high school during the last 3 years. Again, not near as many as you would have at some of the other levels, but certainly we have some. And so I think it comes down to, and the way it should work, both on special education front and on gifted education, is anybody in the process can recognize that there's an issue that requires either some intervention or some enrichment. And then the point is making sure that there's somebody who's designated. At our building, it's the administrative team. That goes to. Somebody says, hey, I think we need to meet on so-and-so to look at this. And then that you have a process for follow-up from there. It works reasonably well, I think, at the high school right now. And I think that, there will certainly be some growing pains, but I would see the other levels following suit with that sort of a model. Sorry.
No? Thank you.
I'll tell you, Brian, my biggest concern as I look at this list is the enrichment groups. You know, I mean, making
Yeah.
sure that if there's a crew of 2 or 3 kids that are really highly motivated and highly interested, that we've got the people power to have individuals coming into the building who can keep them motivated and working with them. And that's going to be, in my estimation, the biggest challenge that we're going to have.
Well, and part of my concern is that if each building is set up a little bit differently by, you know, I mean, if the building administrators are in charge of it at the elementary level, then the possibility exists that each elementary school is going to have a little bit different program, and parents are going to start liking, well, this program's better than at this elementary school than at this one, so I want my kids to go here, or I want my kids to go here. And I can see that being a problem potentially. And I've had some experience with, and I'm not trying to bash on any building administrators, but sometimes the building administrators don't always make the right decision based on certain things, and I don't want to get into that right now, but so I'm a little leery of having building administrators be completely in charge of the tag program at each school. So.
Well, I'm not sure I would say that they're in charge of it as much as they're an integral part of the program, because again, Dr. Stefanik's a piece of that. You've got counselors, you've got teachers who are part of that whole team. But obviously, you know, if a principal, I guess there's always the notion that if as a parent you disagree with something that's happening at a building level, you then, after you've addressed it with the principal, then you go higher to Dr. Stefanik or myself, and we take a look at what's going on as well.
It should be no different than when we had the same issue with a person in the position like Rocky. If there was an issue with his decisions, it would come to me anyways. Instead of delegating it to one person, you are correct, we are delegating it to the building principals.
Well, I think the biggest concern here is, you know, what I struggle with it is that and I know we've talked about it before, but do the building principals seriously have time to do all of this? I mean, with all of their other responsibilities, I know you had mentioned that there were teachers involved too, but not many. It's mostly all principals on most of them. I just worry that it's too much for building principals. That's my concern. They're being really stretched.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you. Our building principals are working hard along with everybody in this system. I mean, our classroom teachers put in long, long hours and days. Our counselors do, our school psychs, I mean, everybody is working very hard. The principals have indicated, they're not here tonight, but they have been a part of this and they believe they can do it. If they didn't, this wouldn't be on the list of things that is being recommended. And again, in an ideal world, if we had the funds, would we say this is not something that we should do? Yeah, but we're unfortunately in a difficult financial situation right now, and you know, we believe we've come up with a way to make a change in a program without hurting the opportunities that we make available for students. 6 months from now, if we say, again, this isn't working, we're going to have to do something different, I'm not afraid to come to you and say it hasn't worked, but everything is important to someone, and we just aren't able to continue with the positions that we currently have.
I would hope that the principals weren't doing it all by themselves.
Yeah, that's what I
They would
was-
have administrative assistants and other staff that, you know, are interested in helping too. They might be, you know, the one kind of overseeing it, but I would hope that it would be a shared duty within the building. And
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's not to minimize,
Right,
it's
it's
additional
still-
work
yes.
for our administrators, no doubt about it. I think it reflects that the administrators are responsible for making sure it gets done, not necessarily for hopefully doing everything. But
Well, and I would say, in looking at the things that the principals would be doing, the invention fair, the heritage fair, performing arts, certainly the teachers at those grade levels are very involved in this too,
And they've been
along
doing
with
it, yeah.
Rocky, and so, and they've been doing it, so, certainly it is more on their plate. But it looks like, as you said, I understand why you would think the enrichment groups might be the toughest thing to make sure that they're working well. That looks a little more up in the air, kind of.
But again, I would go back to, we have ice time now. So, and there are a ton of authentic enrichment opportunities that come across our desks every day. I step out to building principals. This might be a good ice activity when the American Legion sponsors, a poppy contest, drawing contest for kids, or there's a speech contest. There are things where kids can actually win awards for participating, and those things can be integrated into that ice time pretty easily. But again, it's going to take everybody working together to make sure that it happens. But, our classroom teachers are the people who know these kids the best, and so their thoughts on what is appropriate enrichment their input's going to be very important. And again, the resources that we have available to us today are so much greater than what existed in the past. With the internet, teachers can get on and type in an idea and get lesson plans and ideas from teachers across literally the world. So there's plenty of material out there. It's just getting it organized and making sure that we've got adults who can be working with the kids to help them pursue that interest area. I don't like arguing against this. And it's the same with the Compass program. It's unfortunate. I just don't know what else to do. We're trying to make very difficult choices and cuts, and
There just has to be good communication between the parent, the child, the parent, the teacher, the administration. If you really see your child struggling and needing more to do, you need to, on either end of the spectrum, or even in the middle, they need to be challenged more. That needs to be talked about. You need to talk to the teacher then. And if that doesn't work out, you go to the principal, you go to the next level, and really, you have to be an advocate for your child and make sure that they're getting what they need for their education.
And I know, some of Brian's questions to me go to the concern about the kids that don't have that advocate, who's going to make sure they're being evaluated and move forward. But we've heard from several people now that everyone involved in the process is supposed to be identifying those students.
Well, those data digs, they're getting that information. That has to be on a regular basis where they can see that these children are excelling, and they really should be, it shouldn't have to come from the parent. It should be, it's pretty obvious. It's obvious in the classroom that they're excelling and where they're excelling, and those kids need to be pulled out too, as far as making sure that they're getting more advanced information.
Well, I appreciate the concerns being expressed. I think it sort of focuses our attention on what we see as the biggest concerns. Things we want to watch closely as this goes forward, if it goes forward. Other questions or comments concerning the modified cuts and additions? I would look for a motion to approve the modified cuts and additions as presented.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the modified budgetary cuts and additions as presented. And just to be clear, it's listed as modified. It added 10, 11, and 12, and it's the total estimated savings of $470,663, just to make sure everyone's looking at the same thing.
I just would like to say that we, as we vote on this, it is fluid. I mean, things might have to change again or be reshaped and, a year from now or whatever. And because positions do come and go. I mean, there was a point when there wasn't a curriculum director in the district, and it didn't take too many years before they realized that's not a good idea. And so that came back. So, I think we just need to really stay on top of monitoring these changes and make sure that it's going smoothly for the students.
I'd like to echo that because I really think that's the key to making sure that we are meeting the needs of all the students, whether it's the Compass program or the TAG position people and kids. All the way up and down the line. I mean, we're affecting more kids than just these kids. It's a lot of positions, a lot of change, and that is not easy. But it's. And I know part of it is based on our reduced numbers of students, but and also based on the needs of the students, especially those middle school programs. So.
This isn't an easy.
Again, it's all part of trying to move forward in ways that you hope are meeting the students' needs, but yet staying true to what we need to do as a district financially also.
Okay. Anything else? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The ayes have it, the motion carries, and so those cuts and additions as presented are approved. But it's clear there were concerns and reservations. I appreciate the thoughtful, civil discussion, and again, we want to watch it closely going forward.